to the cloud, right? That's the recording button. Okay, so good afternoon and welcome, Jumoke, to our recording, our session on conversations at the Sahara Center. Just very quickly, the Sahara Center is a not-for-profit that is focused on supporting Nigeria's creative industries through research and capacity building and policy research that also guides policy making. And we have the conversations at the Sahara Center where we invite leading practitioners from the creative industry to contribute to the development of the cultural and creative industry in Nigeria, particularly to strengthen the level of professionalism, critical thinking, creative consciousness within the industry. And so this time we have Jumoke Sanwo, who is the creative director of the Revolving Art Incubator, RAI, and who is a storyteller and a cultural producer. And she's going to be talking to us about the art of negotiation and stating your value proposition as a creative sector agent in Nigeria. So good afternoon, Jumoke, and welcome to our
session. Hi, Adu. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be on your platform. Thank you for the invitation. And also, I look forward to a great engagement.
Great. So basically, we'll just go into it and just tell us a little bit about yourself in terms of who you are, what you do, and why you think that it's important that you understand how to negotiate.
So I am a lens-based storyteller, and by that, in simple terms, it just basically means that I use lens-based mediums, so photography, video art, film, and virtual reality to tell stories. But aside from that, I am also a cultural producer. And I also consider myself in my role as a cultural producer as an interlocutor as well. So I look at how to contextualize, some of the stories, to ensure that our histories, our values, and our institutions are well represented through the act of storytelling. So that's pretty much what I do. In 2016, I founded Revolving Art Incubator. It's a space for transdisciplinary engagement, and basically what we do is to try to find the intersection between artistic practice and also across other disciplines as well, and to look at ways, for us to begin to create prototypes, for the future. And by that, what I invariably mean is that, when you look at histories, the way to actually, look at timelines in history is through objects, through artistic objects. But then in an age such as ours, how are we replicating that? How are we engaging? How are we creating sort of objects for the future? So that's actually where the space that we're in presently, and to try to find an intersection between artistic practice and also technology as well.
Oh, wow. Sounds like you're very future forward in terms of what you're doing, in terms of the virtual reality space, but also using technology, which is important because we need to understand how to do that within the creative sector, but also across industries in Nigeria. So tell me, negotiation, I'm sure you've had to negotiate several times in your projects that you're doing. Can you tell us a bit about what it means, what you've learned from it? And, some of us don't like to negotiate. And why do you think it's important to understand the art of negotiation?
Okay, so I think I will start from pretty much my background, So I studied in Nigeria. I went to Ife, studied English. I started off writing, and then obviously at the time, photography for me was a hobby. But over time, I sort of like looked for a way, to begin to engage, both as a visual and also as a literary, artist, and then over time, I've just sort of found a way to cross over medium, so from photography into video art. And then I finally found my space in virtual reality because it allows for me to bring all of these elements of storytelling into one space. Coming from that, at the time when I was coming into the space, even being an artist was such, I would say, was such a profession that was not, in essence, respected or revered or given the right, sort of like, what's the word now? Reverence, I would say, is the word. So artists are usually looked at as people that they just wonder about. They create these pieces. You didn't have, sort of like the respect, and all of that. So that's when I came into the space. And one of the things that and because I was coming in as a photographer, which was even when you look at the hierarchies, of artistic expression, photography is sort of like on the lower end of things. So you have obviously sculptures, you have fine artists, but then photography is like, you take photos. Okay, yeah, I can also take photos. I can also use my mobile phone to take photos. So it wasn't really given that much consideration, nor, was it, something to actually for photographers to earn an income from. So that's how I started, begin to negotiate, how do you first of all, gain respect as an artist. Again, artists are seen only in terms of the tangible things they create, but in traditions of old, artists were also thinkers. They were also people that, in essence, where there was also sort of like the spiritual element of artistic practice as well. Where they're seen as embodiments of sort of like um, connecting, to higher sort of like thinking and expressions. And in that way, I wanted my starting point was to actually refocus, what artists, the role of artists in the community. What are artists meant to do? They're not just meant to create outputs. They're also meant to think. And how can artists think? They also have to have knowledge, and that knowledge is not just in terms of the formal knowledge. They need to begin to look at the informal knowledge as well. So I think the negotiation even started in the positioning of myself as a creative person. And then from that space, it then moved on, into how do I sustain myself, as an artist? How do I begin to earn an income as an artist? And I think that's also just another negotiation that had to take place. And I'll give examples down the line. And in setting up Revolving Art Incubator, it was one of the factors that led to that was this idea of it happened. We had gone to. I was part of a collective called the Invisible Borders, and in 2015 we were part of the Venice Biennale, and we had this amazing exhibition at the Venice Biennale. And usually when that happens, you have all these opportunities that come at you, international opportunities to go for residencies, to partner with this, to partner with that. But I just felt like when you gain that sort of prominence, the idea is to go back to come back local and to look at how to sort of add value to look to the local space. I realized that one of the challenges that creatives faced in Nigeria was the fact that they didn't have a lot of spaces to experiment. And without experimentation, you cannot improve your craft. If you're always confined to certain sort of outputs, oh, this is what the collector would like, or this is what will sell, and all of that does not allow for the artist to grow. So I realized that in order for us to grow artistically in the environment, we have to sort of create a space for engagement, where people can even just come together. And this was what led to the start of Revolving Art Incubator, because I saw like there was a need for that. In terms of negotiating the space that eventually became Revolving Art Incubator, it was also, we identified that there was also a conscious dispossession of public spaces in Nigeria. So when you look at public spaces, for example, where do people commune? Everybody is living in their own silo. I think that's also partly because I didn't grow up in Lagos. I grew up in Ibadan, and we had all of this many spaces where people actually meet, and engage, and all of that stuff. And I just realized that in Lagos it was not also the same. So what has happened? Places that people would typically meet, the bar beach, um, you know, um, that is also no longer a space to meet up. So where do people actually really meet up in the city? And without meeting up, there's no room for engagement. So it was both. So Revolving Our Incubator was like an intervention, and it was an intervention into negotiating physical space, but also social space as well. And when we did that, it then created a different dynamic in the art ecosystem. We gave artists the opportunity to be able to experiment without the pressure of commercial viability. And I think that in essence changed how people engaged or approached their artistic practice. And I think once we did that, then it then created conversations, around other spaces also opening up, to that possibility as well. So if an artist doesn't sell work, then what becomes of them? Then the second intervention was also in terms of sourcing for local funding, which I think is also an act of negotiation as well. How do we actually ensure that we are not? So one of the things that one of the format or a model at RAI was that we would we focused solely on raising funding for the project locally. The first few years, obviously, we had to self-fund because it was absolutely impossible to get anybody interested. The number one question they asked was, "What's in it for me? How do what do I gain from this? If the artists don't sell work, then what does that mean?" And all of that, And because our space, we had had a great negotiation with Silverbird Galleria, whereby we had negotiated a dead space. We had gone, when we met them, they had this idea that, oh, why they were having challenges with footfall, at the Galleria, and they were thinking about the possibility of actually maybe doing something artistic within the space. But we had a proposal of an incubator space. At the time, they didn't even understand what that meant. So I said, okay, in order for them not to have the pressure, we looked around and said, why don't we take this dead space? It doesn't stop you from, it's a fire exit, it's of no real consequence to you. We can utilize it. And when we do make sales from, the artistic production emanating from our space, then we would remit a certain percentage to you. So for them, it was a win-win situation. They didn't say, oh, okay, it's a space that wasn't in use anyway, so you can go ahead and stuff, and it doesn't disrupt anything. So we had the space, which we negotiated through creating value for that space. Then we've also created value through our negotiation for the artists, to have a space for them to experiment. And the next stage was in terms of the funding in itself, So by the second year, and the word was going around about the work that we were doing. We were engaging so many creative practitioners, both locally and internationally, were quite interested about the space. And then we were sort of like bringing forth, upcoming artists, which is also something that was giving them the voice, because again, you have a lot of upcoming artists that want to experiment, but then nobody gives them the opportunity. So we started from that prism. We were also engaging, using a lot more uh, sort of like a transdisciplinary engagement as well. So artists shouldn't exist in vacuum, and that's one of the things that. So we're introducing our artists to technology. We had this workshop, in collaboration with Unisi 3D in 2018, where we introduced artists to extended reality and the possibilities in creating work in that space. At the time, there was no conversation about NFTs. There was really no conversation about digital assets. So we sort of like set the pace for that, in essence, and now we're taking that. I mean, the next set of conversations we're having now is we're trying to see how our artists can begin to thrive in the NFT space. And that's where we are at this point. We're collaborating with Markatis Incubator in Turkey. And we're looking for ways whereby we begin to actually monetize, some of the artistic production that we have. So I think that in essence is how a personal, I would say, venture has sort of become a collective intervention that it continues to sort of shape, artistic practice in Lagos.
Thank you. Right. Thank you for sharing that. And I would just draw up a few things from what you said that I think it's important for people to note is the sense of, first of all, understanding that what you're doing is of value and trying to then ensure that you understand the market terrain and understand how people perceive what you're doing. Because it's important that you not just simply go without knowing that, okay, if I'm trying to be a photographer, people don't respect it. So therefore, the first hurdle is to create a sense of respect. And then and then you now need to then think of how you need to do that for yourself. As you said, you had to then look for opportunities. You had to create the opportunities. You had to almost prove yourself. And we can't, we can't short circuit that journey. It's very important that we understand that various things need to be done. And, you can come back to me here if you want to add to that. But it's that sense of you can't short circuit success and the journey, but it's also then being innovative. I really like the story of RAI and Silverbird Galleria and the idea of using something that was unused space, right? It was dormant and it wasn't being used, and we were able to convert it and bring life into it, and then also provide value. And is that we're coming to that in a bit, just in terms of value, but is that sense of being clear being connected to the pulse of the city, right? Because it's that sense of the artist being a thinker, the creative sector agent being a thinker. And sometimes I feel like we expect other people to do that work for us. We expect that somebody will create this and do this for us. But it's that sense of being curious, being hardworking, and being, knowing, being aware of, being up to date as to what's going on, so that you can then be better able to exploit opportunities. Because if you didn't know what Silverbird was trying to do, you were not even going to even be able to um, go to them, to talk to them, to ask them to give you the space. But it's
Yeah.
that sense as well, exactly, and it's that sense as well of negotiating, where it's not a win-lose situation, but it should be a win-win situation. And I feel like that's very important here because, and as you said, the journey of RAI has then gone international. And we would like to come back perhaps another time to talk more about the decision for local funding, but on how you access that. And, that's another conversation on funding and fundraising. But in terms of that negotiating, because I'm sure you've also had to have some very tough conversations, how have you been able to articulate the value proposition that you, Jumoke, Sanwo, and RAI bring to the table to let people know that they can work with you and partner with you? Because one is respect, two is creating a solution, but then how do people even appreciate your value?
Okay, so I think one of the ways that has played out for me personally as an artist was before I sort of had an inroad into what was going on locally. I had done a lot of work regionally and also internationally as well. And I think that, in essence, had set some sort of, I would say, I've established myself, in the system. And I did that by first working on my own craft as an artist. And then secondly, I did that also by also adding value to other sort of um, organizations. So, for example, I joined Invisible Borders, and I was the director of administration for about 3 years. And with that project, it was a regional project that sort of investigated, borders across Africa. And with that, we were traveling a lot, meeting artists, working in different spaces across Africa. And these expressions are always, I mean, the format of Invisible Borders is through road trips. So we would create all of these networks, traveling around the continent. And I think with that, in essence, and the success, of the project at the time, also gave some sort of credence, to the value of my work as an artist as well as an administrator. Now, coming out of Invisible Borders, which I think the height, of the project was when we featured at the Venice Biennale, which is almost like the Olympics of artistic practice. And it was kind of like, okay, now that these guys have done this, now what's next? And I was able to then now transfer that value into bringing it local, to say, okay, now, we've done all of this stuff regionally and we've done this work internationally. Now we want to, I personally, as an artist as well as a cultural producer, I want to bring this value to the local artistic ecosystem. So that's how I was able to do that. Now, in terms of negotiating space, I think what has happened is that because I'd established myself, I remember that through my journeys and road trip, even just on my Facebook, people would follow me, and so I developed this huge followership, and people were really fascinated by what I was doing as this really tiny person moving around, so to speak, dangerous parts of Africa and traveling and meeting people, but also, in essence, sharing, my findings, and the conversations and all of that. I think that generated a certain level of engagement, which was sort of like social engagement, which I then tried to transfer onto a physical space. So I first developed a social engagement on social media, and then I transferred that into the physical entity that REI was, and people wanted then to now know, okay, what is REI? What are we doing here? And the more that we began to engage, not only did people it resonated with people because here are people, you have to also understand the local context as well. So Nigeria, for example, you have that a lot of people who would have typically gone in the way of artistic practice can't do so because they don't see how they can earn an income from it. So you find people who typically have they're very creative and all of that. They end up in the banks, and all of that stuff. So what we did was we opened up a space for those type of people who after they closed, from their 9 to 5, and we had a couple of exhibitions even of people of that nature. For example, the late Matthew Idang, who was, he was a geologist by day, but he had, a passion for photography. He had we had a fantastic job, with Mobile. He's well traveled and all of that, but he had this craving and this desire to become an artist. But then again, he didn't have the opportunity and the platform to do it. So we gave him an opportunity and platform to do that. And we have other people such as that as well. So RAI became that place of intermingling between disciplines. So now he's a geologist. He has some sort of formal experience that he can also use or apply or even exchange with other creatives that would help them in their own sort of growth as well. So I think in that sense, we started removing artists from the cocoon of the studio space and sort of like creating sort of like a platform for that sort of like engagement that is across disciplines. So you had a lot of architects found a space, very, very useful for their practice. First of all, is in the use of space. Then secondly is that, okay, we can also find people of other disciplines within this space, so it became not only a physical connection, but also a social connection as well. And people would come, and we used to have this poetry event called Outspoken, which was also a diary of contemporary discourse. We brought together conversations online into an offline space, and we sort of situated that within the context of poetry. So artists will reflect on issues, political issues, social political issues going on, and then they would write sort of poems and poetry around it. And we did that also except for 3 years. And that was a hit, and people would come from all over because it resonated with them. First of all, they gave them the opportunity for them to actually talk about the social political situation in the country. But then there was also the element of the literary element as well with the poetry, so you could do all of that conversation and you could listen to beautiful poetry afterwards. Somebody could come and play the guitar and all of that stuff. So we had all of this program. There was also words as therapy as well with Amanda, who is a psychologist, but also a photographer. And she brought that element of that cross discipline into the space as well. So here is a creative just as yourself, but she also had a formal training as a psychologist, and she brought that element into the space. So people just typically, it was sort of like a space that addressed, the realities, of living as a Nigerian, where it's not a clear cut in essence that people would go to school and come out and do this and do this. There's also that element of that in-betweenness, and that's in essence what ARIA represented, creating a space of in-betweenness where people found themselves.
Wow. If even as you're speaking, it's just amazing to hear about the journey and to hear about the stories and the various people that have come on to work with you and the various opportunities that you've provided for people. And late Matthew, like you mentioned, was a very established artist, and it's important that space was created, because one of the key things as well, going back to what you have said about respect, is that because there's the perception that creative sector or the creative, the arts is not a proper career path. It's not a well-defined career path. You then find that most people then have some day jobs, and then they have another role where they either, in the night time is when their passion comes out. And it's more, I think Jumoke's battery has gone. So I'm hoping she's going to join us on the phone. So 1 second, Olive, if she can join us on the phone, and then we can just continue this. I'll pause the recording. Okay, so I was just talking about how you were, let's just recap, and the video editor will edit this part, but it's the sense that, that because of the point of respect that you made earlier, right, in terms of people don't see being involved in the creative sector as a well-defined career path and as a serious path, then we find that others are going into one direction, and then in the evenings they're having their artistic passion as, they spend time on that. So it's almost like they're doing two jobs and two roles. And that's why it's important that more and more platforms come up, so that more and more people see the opportunities within the art space, understand that they can be respected, understand that they can make a living from it, but also understand that the work needs to be done. It's important to do the work, And more than anything else, it's that sense of collaborating with others, identifying others within your space, or like you mentioned, this this sectionality and interdisciplinary or transdisciplinary approach that will then enable the value proposition to even be amplified, to be raised, because we also have the key role of educating. And to educate people, you need to connect with them with the language that they understand and what they can do. So no, thank you so much for that and for sharing those examples, because those examples have shown that, first of all, it's important to know what you're trying to do, but it's also important to negotiate, and it's also important to use your value proposition to set that negotiation, to give yourself power that will give you some sort of negotiating power. And it's that sense of not being too entitled, but knowing that, you have to show, why should someone work with you? Why should someone invest in you? Why should someone fund your project? It's about doing the work, articulating the work, and ensuring that you also are explicit about what value they're going to get and how they're going to get that value or capture it. So you've explained, for example, how when you're working on Invisible Borders, you were able to work in terms of moving an online audience and using that to demonstrate, interest in the project, and using that to then, almost like present yourself as a platform that can encourage these types of conversations. And it's good, and I feel very privileged actually to be recording this conversation, because I think more of these type of stories need to go out. So I would like to ask, before we close, just can you tell me a time when negotiation didn't go so well? Because it's all the same. We're talking about the great experiences, which is fine, but we had times that didn't go so well.
No, I think I have several of those, obviously examples of when it went completely wrong. And I would probably, so I think I need to think about, the best example, to use to sort of cap, this conversation.
Is it like the best no you got? Is it like
the best no? And to be honest, we've gotten several of those. Personally, even artistic as a person as well. I'm trying to say, like best no. What's the best? I'm actually thinking, but I think personally as an artist, and I think one of the ways that I experienced that was when I was trying to go into the extended reality space, so I'd gotten, this a residency, in Cape Town with Electric South, to do this new dimension workshop, which was sort of like a crossover. It was like a lab, to crossover for artists to crossover into the immersive technology space. So I'd gone in there, I'd done, my time at the lab, and then I was meant to come back home and do a piece. And usually, you're meant to get, extended reality and specifically virtual reality is a very expensive venture. So when you're doing, the costing and all of that stuff, to produce something, I remember when we did our budget for Lagos at Large, it was about $30,000, dollars. I think it was even more, to produce Lagos at Large. So I was going around all excited about this possibility, but nobody was like, yeah, but what's in it? Like, yeah, you're doing this. How do we make money? And I was like, no, this is, we want to get this into spaces. We want to be able to present this maybe even at the Oscars, because people at that time, extended reality was sort of transitioning into mainstream in that sense. And you had the likes of Noni de la Pena, who had broken that, and she had gone into that space. I think she won a Golden Globe or something. And people were actually, really going into the space. And it was like, no, we need to put Nigeria on a production map. I had all this sort of idealistic, things that I was thinking about. We need to do this. But to be honest, and there were people in the tech space. A lot of people just didn't see the value in it. So at the time we had Lagos at Large, I didn't even think about how we were going to produce it, because I'm like, how do we produce it with zero funding? How do we produce something like zero funding? So then we had some funding from Electric South, which, and then we also had support from Inisi 3D. So at the time, it was just sort of like, I don't think this project would take off. So I'd already given up on it. Like, okay, this is not going to happen. We don't have the funding for it. Again, I don't want it to be another project that is self-funded. I had so many of this self-funding. I wanted something that, there was that sense of, some money coming. Okay, so and so at the time, it was just sort of like it didn't happen. So that was, I think for me, that was it was a devastating, I got a lot of no's, and that for me was a bit like, oh no, and people don't see it, or they don't see quite, they don't quite see, what you're seeing as an artist. But I didn't take it, I don't think I took the no personally, I didn't take it that personally. But we ended up going on to produce Lagos on March. We got funding from IDFA, who actually helped us push the project. IDFA is the International Film Festival in Amsterdam. So they sort of like one of the largest documentary platforms. So they gave us the final funding, which came, in a very interesting way. And that was what actually pushed the project to the end. And we ended up premiering at IDFA. We ended up being on Forbes list, as one of the top 50 experiences for 2019. But again, I feel a bit sad because I would have loved for that to be a local organization or an institution to own that sort of success in essence. I would have loved for it to have been a co-production done, with some local institution or bank, or something. And for me, that would have been a great, opportunity. But then again, I think it's also, as you said, creating value and trying to find ways to appeal to the local audience, because the local audience is always about, they use Nollywood as a template, for example, in the creative space. So they look at, obviously, eyeballs, they look at how many people is this reaching. And that is something that we're working on, to ensure that we as artists stop being so insular, that we sort of start getting more out there and being accessible. Because our language is always very insular, it's very, it doesn't quite encompass, the local audience, so oftentimes, and even at ARIA, we tried to start doing that as well. I remember there was one of the exhibitions we did, we had the artist statement in Pidgin English, because again, it's a way to also democratize, the consumption of art, while we're always creating all this artistic project with very highfalutin English language, that people on the streets will not understand. So we did that, artist statement in Pidgin English, in English language. And again, we're beginning to sort of localize our ideas as well. How do we reach the wider audience? And I think Nollywood has been a template for that. In that sense, that they break down and they ensure that there's accessibility. So yeah, so I'm not sure if that's a great example of, a place where I've got it, but I think for me that affected me personally, because it was a personal project I was very much vested in. I think it really affected, my perception as well. Because okay, at what point, I've had exhibitions everywhere. At what point do I have local acceptance and, be someone that would attract funding, for example, from local institutions, and things like that. Then also, I think, in terms of, I'm trying to say where else again. But I have many examples, with RAI, us writing proposals and it being knocked down. They're saying, oh, okay, yeah, your idea is really nice, but it's not for us at the moment, and stuff like that. I remember also us trying to get sponsorship, for Outspoken, which was one of the programs on our platform, and it was quite difficult to also do that as well. I also think that maybe it's also our approach as well. So maybe we're not approaching this, as local as we should. But then again, I think we've just tried to do it as much as we know, as much as we can. But as we go along, we're meeting, obviously, collaborators and people, and I think it gets better.
No, it will get better. And I believe that it will get better for the industry as more people continue to do the work, but also as you've demonstrated here that maybe for you to get one yes, you have to go through a few no's, right? And it's that set of almost like an iceberg where what you see at the top, the rejections are so many. Success is really difficult, which you see. But just to give some sense of comfort, just before we end this, I was on a call earlier before this session, and it was that sense of tourism and talking about the challenges. And this was the former Minister of Tourism at Seychelles. And he was just talking about how even in his country, the prophet is never appreciated in their own space. It almost has to be somewhere else, and then you get that, and then they start to say, okay, this is what you've been saying. So it's that sense of perhaps not being too hard on ourselves, but also realizing that we just need to connect with whoever appreciates while trying to also build local understanding and local capability and local appreciation. So thank you so much, Jumoke, for this conversation. I would say that I have learned a lot, and that I hope that our listeners have also learned and seen how they can input some of these and apply some of these into their own life and into their own practice and into their own work. And the idea, hopefully, is that you continue to do more things. Aria continues to do exciting things. And you mentioned now, a lot of your work is also looking at capacity building and supporting the people that are coming. So if the people want to get in touch with you, do you want to share just your contact details, which we'll also share in the notes to this podcast?
Okay, so you can actually reach us. We're visible on across social media platforms. So we're on Instagram, we're on Twitter, we're on Facebook as well. So you can send us DMs if that's easier. Otherwise, you can send us emails, art@revolvingartincubator.com, communication@revolvingartincubator.com, and incubator@revolvingartincubator.com. So all of these are opportunities for you to actually have direct access to us. For incubator, that's more about, maybe if you're an artist or you're looking for placement opportunities and things like that. Communication, maybe you have projects going on, you want us to help you amplify it. We also do that as well, and that is open to artists, to writers and things like that. We have a program we call the Book Drive. So we also help authors, people that are coming up, to amplify their projects. And then obviously Art at Revolving Art Incubator is for exchange, and that comes directly to me. So if you want a direct conversation with me, that's the one to actually write or correspond with. Yeah.
Right. Thank you, Jumoke, for this. Thank you so much. And thank you for joining the conversations at the Sahara Center. So until next time, this is goodbye from us. Thank you.
All right, bye. Thank you. Thank you, Adu, for this opportunity. And thanks to the TSC team for making this happen. I really enjoyed it. Thank you very much. All the very best.